Hey there, everybody. We're going to go ahead today and finish up the last two themes of geography. Those two themes are movement and human-environment interaction. When we're talking about AP human geography, right, we're talking about the movement of humans, obviously, but along with people comes quite a few different things. So when people move from place to place, they also bring new goods, they bring new ideas, and they bring every aspect of their culture. So as people move from place to place, a lot of things get brought and moved along with them. Okay. Now, there are quite a few terms that we're going to be talking about within this set of notes. So be prepared to do a little bit of writing, be prepared to do a little bit of deep thinking. Okay. The first topic or the first vocab term we're looking at is called spatial interaction. Okay. You see the word spatial, you think about the word space because that's the root of the word spatial. Okay. Now we're not talking about outer space. We're not talking about planets and satellites and things like that. We're talking about the way that things are interacting with each other over any given space, right? Any two places around the world. How much connection is there between two places? Whether there's a lot of connection or whether there's just a tiny little bit of connection or no connection at all, doesn't matter. With this term, we're talking spatial interaction is just how much or how little connection there is between two places. Okay. Um, the second vocab term is friction of distance. Okay. When you think of the word friction, friction is what slows things down, right? Think about like Velcro, right? There's a lot of friction there. If you took a hockey puck and you slid it or skidded it across an ice rink is a frictionless surface. So that hockey puck is pretty much going to just glide right across. It's not going to stop. If you took that same hockey puck and you did the same and you slid it down a carpeted hallway, it's going to stop within a few feet because that carpeted surface has more friction to it. Well, when we're talking about this geographic concept, the word friction is a little bit different here. Okay, we're talking more metaphorical friction than anything here. So it's how much does distance, right? Distance being the friction here. How much does that distance get in the way? How much does distance slow down the movement of something? Whether that's the movement of people, the movement of goods, the movement of ideas, or anything else. Okay, typically, the further the distance, the more that would get in the way of any sort of interaction. However, right, because it is the year 2020, um, right, you can do quite a bit with over long distances. Okay, so the distance between places these days doesn't matter quite as much, right? How hard would it be for me to get a shirt imported from China? Well, these days, not very hard. Friction of distance is not too high these days, right? Friction does not get in the way that much these days. Whereas if it was hundreds of years ago, right, friction of distance is much greater. It's much more significant. It does impede people's abilities to do things, such as getting goods from halfway across the world. Okay. Um, Distance decay is another concept that, again, the vocab terms sound the same or similar, but there is a key difference between it. Okay, so distance decay is the idea or the concept that interaction or connection between places typically, not always, but typically decreases as the distance increases. And it kind of just makes sense, right? Um, any two places on the world map, right? If they're very close to each other, odds are they probably interact more with each other than two places that are on opposite ends of the world from each other, right? The U.S. interacts more and trades more with, say, Mexico or Canada than it does with Australia or with, I don't know, South Africa, just because distance is something that um, impacts that, right? You pick any city in the United States, if it's closer, it's going to have less of that distance decay than if it's a city that's halfway across the country. Okay. Um, the next one we're talking here, And there's a lot on this slide, and I totally get it, but it's an incredibly important concept that comes up quite a bit. It's the idea of what's called space-time compression. Okay? Space-time compression, break it into those three words, right? It's the idea that over time, right, as we progress through time, the space between places in the world has been compressed or decreased, right? The time it takes for something to get from one part of the world to another part of the world has gone down. It's decreased. Whether that's the movement of people, whether that's the movement of goods, or whether that's information and ideas that get from one place to another, um, the idea that the world is figuratively smaller, okay? The world has always been the same size, right? The same diameter, the same radius, all that good stuff, but it feels smaller these days, right? The example I provide here, okay, 300 years ago, if I wanted to get from the United States to Europe, the only way I would have been able to do that would have been to hop on a ship, and it would have taken me probably 6 to 8 weeks to go across the Atlantic Ocean, and it would have been a miserable journey, and that's how I would have gotten there. Okay? But as technology has progressed, these days, if I was feeling super ambitious, all I would have to do is book a plane ticket, and boom, I could go to England and back in a weekend if that was my prerogative. Okay? So, again, over time, space has been compressed. Okay? Again, not literally, but figuratively. It's the same idea that if you got your phone out right now, you could call up or have a video chat with somebody in China, somebody in Uganda, anywhere in the world, right? We can connect with each other. We can get ideas, we can get information, we can get communication done all over the world at a much quicker rate. So um, it almost feels like, right, just by taking your phone out, you have anybody in the world as your neighbor, so to speak. Okay? So just to illustrate that again, I'm not going to spend time on this really, other than just to read these, but just to get you thinking about this concept of space-time compression, right? Think about the following questions, these questions on your screen. If it was the year 2020 versus if it was the year 1800 or the year 1000, okay? So thinking about where your clothes are produced, where your food is produced, how long it takes for you to get information or news from across the world, right? If there was an earthquake that was catastrophic halfway across the world, we can find out about that on the internet through Facebook or through Twitter in seconds, right? How long would it take you to travel to France? How long would it take you to get to New York? Think about the ways that you would have to go about doing that, okay? And then thinking about contacting people. Thinking about how quickly you can conduct trade, or the fact that the shoes that you buy are probably being made, you know, 7,000 miles away from your home, and they can be shipped over here within a matter of a week or so. Okay, it's insane how closely connected we are with other parts of the world. That's the idea of space-time compression. It's also another concept that's not in these slides, but it's a key concept. It's called globalization. The idea that over time, this world has been more and more and more connected, right? Everything that happens in one part of the world now impacts other parts of the world at a much larger extent than it used to. Okay, so a lot of stuff. Everyone, take a deep breath, and then we're going to move on to theme number 5, which is human environment interaction. Okay, this one's pretty straightforward, right? Human environment interaction. It's how humans and the environment interact with each other, how we impact our environment. And let me tell you, people have not been doing a very good job of caring for their environment. Whether it's clearing rainforests to have cattle ranches, or whether it's polluting rivers and lakes, whether it's polluting the ozone and leading to drastic changes in our climate, all these different things, right? We impact our environment significantly, but also the environment often impacts people and what we are able to do. So the first concept here, the first vocab term is called environmental determinism. This is a theory or an idea that human behavior, what we do, is pretty much completely controlled by our environment around us, right? If I wandered my way into a desert, um, I would have fewer options to be able to survive than if I wandered into a location that had a lot more resources available to me, okay? So the idea there is that we're kind of restricted by our environment. Our environment limits what we're capable of doing. Now, that's been true for tens of thousands of years of human history. The environment has really, really limited to us. So people have had to settle only in places that really have a lot of resources available for them. This other concept called possibilism is kind of opposite, right? It kind of runs opposite. It's the idea that people determine the success of a place. We are the ones that determine if we can successfully live in a different location. So if we try hard enough, we can live just about anywhere. If we want to live in the middle of the Arctic, great, let's go ahead and try it. If we want to live in the middle of a desert, why not? Okay. If I want to settle, the next thing, Elon Musk wants to make a colony up on Mars. Okay. Does it seem practical? Probably not. But is it possible? Maybe. Maybe. I'm not really sure, actually. But there are aspects of the environment that do limit us and that do make things either more difficult or easier for people to sustain civilization, okay? And those key things are the resources that are available, whether that's food, whether that's products that we use to create and make things. It could be the climate, right? The long-term climate. Is it too hot to sustain life? Is it too cold to sustain life? Is it too rainy? Okay. And then the vegetation, the things that are growing. And then lastly is the landforms. Okay. It's difficult to live in a mountainous area. It's difficult to live in a place that's too rocky or with hard ground that's too dry to grow anything, for example. Okay. So we look at those key things, and those are what are going to determine our success or our ability to live in a certain place. And lastly, right, just to kind of look at a climate map very briefly. I know it's kind of zoomed way out, okay? But think about the ways people have to adapt or to change their environment based on the landscapes that they come across or based on the climate, all right? So this map here, we'll come across this map in another unit as well. It's called the Köppen climate map. You can just see that every different color on this map represents a different climate type. All right, so you'll see in the world, right, certain climates are not conducive to people living there. If it's too hot, if it's too cold, if it's too wet, if it's too dry, whatever it might be, if it's not suitable, you're going to see that human settlements are much less frequent. Right, people don't live in those places nearly as often. Okay. So lastly, your last little takeaway, think about how the environment impacts every aspect of our lives and every aspect of our culture, okay? So for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, right, whatever it was that was growing around us, whatever it was that was readily available as natural resources was what we would make our clothing out of, what we would make our houses out of, and it would be what we would, everything about our daily lives and the lives of the people in our communities and civilizations was based around those natural resources. So, for hundreds of years, that has shaped our culture. So the landscape has shaped our culture, and that has made a huge impact on the world around us. So that give and take between humans and the environment and how they impact each other is that last theme. And that's going to be a huge one that's going to come up throughout this class. So I know that was a lot of stuff. We're going to stop here and let me know if you have any questions. All right? Cool. Peace out.